Welcome back to another Conversations Over Coffee, and welcome back, Marla Weston. I had so many questions left over from our first meeting that she agreed to come back for another round. So without further ado, let's jump back into this conversation with Marla. So Marla, I've read that in 2017, you were named by Modern Healthcare as one of the top 25 women in healthcare. I mean, that's like great honor. Could you please walk us through what it's like to receive that award?
Well, it's always fabulous to receive an award. I think what's really important is why we give awards. You know, we give awards to acknowledge the kind of actions that we want people to do, you know, to really recognize that this is the behavior that we want to encourage. And particularly for my generation, I think women helping other women to be successful was really important. And so it was nice to see that acknowledged and that really recognized.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. That's even a great way to describe it, women helping women. So being able to show how far you've come and how you've helped others, I'm sure that was fantastic. So for the next question, the number of women entering healthcare workforce has increased. I mean, that's just a big trend we've been noticing. So based on your personal experience, could you please walk us through what it means to be a woman and a leader in healthcare?
One of the things that was really interesting as a nurse in particular is that I grew up with a lot of other women in the workplace, right? I grew up in a very female-dominated culture. And when I got into a leadership role in my first nurse executive position, I remember the very first week on the job, I was suddenly in a meeting and I was the only woman in the room. And that was odd for me, right? So I moved from this female-dominated culture to this male-dominated culture.
Right.
And I even remember being in a meeting that first week, and I don't remember what we were talking about, but offering a suggestion as a solution to the problem that we were trying to solve. And no one really acknowledged it. The conversation went on, and 5 or 10 minutes later, a man in the room offered the same suggestion, and everyone thought it was the greatest idea.
Of course.
And that was my first aha that I wasn't living in the same kind of world. And so I had to learn to make my voice heard in that kind of a environment, and what it would take to be listened to. And, because of that experience, what I recognized is that as other nurse leaders, as other women came into the workplace, I needed to help them figure out how to have their voice heard, how to be authentically who they were, but still make sure that their contribution was valued and listened to. And I would say the same thing happened on the opposite side. You know, when I was the CEO of the American Nurses Association, it was a very female-dominated culture. Mm-hmm. And I brought a number of men into leadership roles who had never worked with so many women in the past. And so helping them to find a way to make sure that their contribution and their voice was heard. And that's, to me, part of what diversity is about, right? Is that we are valuing everybody's perspective and sort of highlighting and amplifying those people who are having some difficulty in making sure that their contribution is listened to.
So we kind of talked about this earlier. Nursing as an industry is going through some major upheavals, obviously because of the pandemic. And so, again, we talked about this earlier, but I was wondering, what are some of the positive outcomes you're seeing from these changes, and how far do you see them going into the future, or do you see them staying permanent?
Yeah, I was actually reading something this morning that was talking about what happens in a pandemic or an epidemic, and we all face our own mortality. And one of the consequences of that, we become more clear about what's important to us. And I think that's happened to every person in the world during this pandemic, and certainly has happened within nursing and in healthcare. And one of the things that we recognized that we've known but haven't paid attention to is how emotionally and mentally challenging the work of nursing is, of healthcare is. And I think we've recognized that we need to create structures and processes as organizations and as individuals to take care of ourselves in this really complex work that we do. I think there's a renewed understanding of that, a renewed commitment to that, and I anticipate that that will carry forward in the future. I certainly hope it does, and shame on us if it doesn't, but I think everyone is really committed to that. I think one of the other things that we recognized is how rapidly we can move and how quickly we can innovate. We've had this story, I think, that we've told ourselves in nursing and in healthcare, is that we're slow to make change, that we're not innovative, and we've proved that to be wrong. And I see all kinds of people now coming out with new minor tweaks that make things better, to really transformative ideas that I think will really change how we deliver healthcare in the future. And the third thing that I think we recognized is the power and the importance of the work that we do. We in nursing have always known that our work is valuable. I'm not sure we have valued it. And I think that real deep appreciation as nurses and other healthcare providers about the really precious work that we do and the valuable impact that we make, not only to individual people, but to society as a whole. Every nurse I know has not only done nursing at work, but they have served their family, their friends, their neighbors, their community in very different ways. And I think we've come to understand how much nursing permeates our whole society.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's interesting working here, and especially through the pandemic, you've kind of relearned what you've taken for granted in healthcare. And so
I would say taken for granted in healthcare and in our lives.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a renewed appreciation for everything that's important.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty for nurses entering the field right now. Do you have any advice or simply comforting words for these new nurses?
So one of the things that I've always advised novice nurses is to look around at colleagues who are really happy in their work. Any of us in our workplace walk in and we see people who are dissatisfied and people who are satisfied. And it's a little bit human nature to jump on in the complaining whenever someone's complaining. But I encourage novice nurses in particular to look at people who are really satisfied in their profession, because those are the role models about how to get it right, so to speak. Those are the people who can really help us in understanding the path to have a whole practice where you're satisfied at work and you're replenishing yourself when you're not at work. And so aggregating, sort of associating, role modeling after those people is one of the things that I've always advised nurses. And I think I would double down on that right now. The second thing that I would say is for new nurses, really recognizing that their education was dramatically transformed by the pandemic. They really didn't get the clinical time that most other nurses got as they were learning their profession and their craft. And so really recognizing that it's going to take them a bit longer in the clinical setting to feel comfortable and confident, and not to be panicked by that, just to be patient with that and give themselves a little bit more time than would be normal, if you will. And then the third thing that I would say that I always advise novice nurses is that it is difficult being a nurse. It is wonderful being a nurse, but don't undermine the challenges of seeing people at their most vulnerable moments when they're dying, when they're watching a family member die. Those are emotionally challenging experiences. And every new nurse needs to figure out how to live with that, how to incorporate that, and how to accommodate that. And really reaching out to colleagues when you are experiencing those tough times to get some guidance on what other people do to figure out your own practices so that you have a way of going home at the end of the day where you can leave work at work. Or if you can't leave it at work, you can at least begin to reconcile it so that you can live your life outside of work and you can come back in and do your meaningful work the next day.
That's fantastic advice. I really like giving yourself grace. That's, I think, a big thing, because I'm sure jumping in off of online school is no fun. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you so much again, Marla, for being with us. I feel like I always come away from these learning so much more than I expected. So grateful to have you on the show again.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And thanks for the great questions.
Thank you.